In this video, I want to demonstrate a few ways to smooth the transition between these two layers that were previously merged together. And before I start editing any of the image, I do want to make a copy of this layer. So again, I can come up to Layer and go to Duplicate Layer, or I could just press Control J. And in this case, I'll click OK. So I have a copy of this layer, and then I'm going to lock this layer and turn it off. So I only want to work on this layer above it for a moment. Now, the temptation would be to come over and use the smudge tool, and this might work, but then again, it's not going to really give me what I want. It's going to end up distorting the image even more so than before, and I'm not real crazy about that. So I'm going to just back up, Control Z and Control Alt V to go back to where I was originally with that image. All right, so instead of using the smudge tool, I'd probably start with the clone stamp tool. And this is great for sampling areas. If I wanted to kind of get more of this skin tone blending over top of that, I can do that with the clone stamp tool. And I'm going to kind of get rid of this area of the underlying eye of the profile shot. So the way the clone stamp tool works is you hold the Alt button, and as you see, there's a bullseye that kind of appears. And this is your target area that you're sampling from. So whatever, I want to, those pixels that I want to sample and copy, I would use the Alt button and just click at that spot. And then come over to the spot where I want to replace and click and drag. And you can see as I click and drag, it's sampling the area where the crosshairs was originally located. So that's not too bad. I'm going to just kind of start working on some of these areas and just kind of get some of these areas covered up. Now you do want to be mindful, if I'm using the clone stamp tool and I click on a part where I have an eye and I start kind of working around, you can see as I'm dragging that around, I'm starting to get like another eye there, which might actually look kind of fun. You might have some fun with that, but again, it looks a bit odd. And maybe one might argue that, hey, this is looking more like one of Picasso's images. I don't really want to do that for here. I just want to kind of make a smooth transition along this edge. I'm not going to go too crazy with the image. I just want to kind of smooth up that transition. So again, I'm going to use the Alt button, and maybe I can sample over here and maybe even bump down the opacity a little bit so it's not quite so severe. And if you look at my brush is set to very soft. It's at a 0 hardness. And let's just see when we sample. I want to take some of this lighter skin tone and kind of get it over in this area as well. So Alt click to sample and then click and drag. And I'll end up blurring some of this out as well. So right now it's looking really patchy, but that's okay. Maybe I want to bring some of the color from the forehead down this way. And if I increase the brush size, you can kind of see what this does. The larger the brush, the larger the sample area that it will take from that original portion. So I don't want to make it too big, but I want to make it kind of big enough to kind of cover some of this area. So if you just press the bracket keys and click and drag, adjusting the bracket keys, the left bracket will make the brush smaller, essentially. I just want to kind of bring some of this down a little. But you have to be careful, if you accidentally bring it down too far, you'll get some areas that you don't really want to repeat. So maybe, using the clone stamp tool could be a good place to start. Here it's picking up the edge of the chin, so I don't really want to do that. Let me back up a little bit. And we'll resample, Alt-click. I'm just kind of starting to get some of that color, just kind of blending the two tones together. Alright, so that's kind of using the clone stamp tool. And just like any brush, you can adjust the size, you can adjust the opacity, you can even get into using the blend modes, which for now I'd probably stay away from, at least on this assignment. Alright, so it's still looking pretty choppy here. I want to show you a couple other tools that you might want to use. In particular, the spot healing brush tool. This is great for blemishes on the skin. And essentially, you just click over an area and it samples the pixels around that area and replaces the target area with kind of an average of the pixels that surround it. So this is great for removing skin blemishes. It's also good if you want to kind of smooth out some of the stuff that's happening around it. Now, the problem with the spot healing brush is, if you go over something like that, it's going to if you click and drag over, it's going to kind of blend away and tend to kind of erase and smear together all the pixels around that or within the path. So I'm going to press Control Z to back up and get rid of that. But just to warn you, the spot healing brush is more just kind of like clicking in trouble areas. It's not really that great for painting over a broad area to replace it. But it is a good way to kind of just clean up some things here. Let's see, we're on soft hardness, that's good. And you can also change some things here. You might want to play around with some of these other settings here. That seems to be doing a little better job. The create texture seems to be doing a pretty good job smoothing that out. A lot better than on content aware. So there's different settings here. The proximity match does a pretty good job as well. I think overall the create texture I think is working probably a little better. So the idea is not to totally obliterate the image, it's just to kind of soften up that transition so it looks a little more believable. And there's still some kind of strange things happening in there. I think maybe we bump down the brush size a bit more, kind of go over some of this area. Alright, so that's looking a little better. You kind of smooth that out a little bit. Alright, so I've got a pretty good transition here. Another tool that you might want to use is the blur tool. And with this, you just kind of click and drag, and this will tend to soften up things as well. It's not making a whole lot of difference. If I go over an area that hasn't been blurred or blended like this with the other tools, you can kind of hopefully see. You just click and drag over top of an area, and gradually that softens your detail and tends to blur it out. So, again, I'm not real crazy about doing it here, obviously, but I might want to kind of blur some of these areas as well, just to kind of soften up that transition from the different skin tones. Alright, so that's the blur tool. Let's see. Let me back out a little bit here. And let's see, we could probably also do some brushing over top of this as well. So if I switch to the brush tool, now my foreground and background colors are not what I want. So actually, I think I'm going to go with the eyedropper tool to sample some colors. So maybe I just want to sample this. Click once on the area that you want to sample, and if you notice, that automatically changes your foreground color to that color. So if I switch to the brush tool, Now I can paint over top of this with this color, which is an exact color of that sample that I took. Now, if my opacity is at 100, this is going to tend to start to become very noticeable. You know, if I start brushing on this 100% opacity, you know, it's not really helping the transition there. So I'm going to back up with Control Z, and instead of 100% opacity, I'm going to bump this way down, you know, maybe 15, 20% opacity, and I just want to kind of start getting a subtle layer of that color on top of this, just to kind of smooth out some of the skin blemishes here. It almost kind of has the effect of like putting makeup on, but that may kind of help a little bit with as far as blending that transition. And if I press the eyedropper tool, or if I press I to activate the eyedropper tool, I can sample other colors as well. Switch back to the brush tool until at 22%. I want to kind of go over some of this area here. Let's make the brush a little smaller. And I just want to kind of hide some of this hair right in that area, just that there's some gray, some weird stuff kind of going on there. So just to kind of soften up that a little bit. And I'm not real crazy what's going on with that, so that area, so we'll sample some of the color from the hair, and again switch to the brush tool with the B, press B to activate that brush. And I might just want to get a little bit going over that area. And it looks like there's a remnant of the edge of the image. Looks like we're getting a bit of a ghost image here with that line showing up. That could have been left over from the merging of those layers. So I want to try and go over some of that as well. So I'm just kind of brushing over top of this. Maybe we'll go with a little bit slightly higher opacity. There we go, just to kind of hide that a little. And maybe switch back to the clone stamp tool in a minute, but I just want to kind of brush in some of this area just to kind of get the hair looking a little bit more believable, I guess. So just trying to blend some of that so it looks a little bit more believable. All right, so this area down here, I think we may want to go, let's see, probably with the clone stamp tool is the way I would go down here to fix some of this. And let's just sample maybe this area right here, and then just kind of hide some of those lines that seem to be showing up. And if I'm not happy with the clone stamp tool, certainly go with the spot healing brush. And just kind of get in here and clean some of that up as well. So a lot of different ways to kind of correct things. As you can see, the spot healing brush is doing some weird stuff down here. So I might want to actually bring down the size of my brush a little bit more. And that's looking pretty good for the most part. I still see some of those lines showing up. And there's some weird stuff going on down here as well, that merged layer. So spot healing brush, just kind of click over the problem areas, any moles or skin blemishes that you want to get rid of. Spot healing brush is great for that. All right, so that's looking pretty good. A few other ways you could work here. Besides that, I suppose you could use the healing brush tool as well. But as you can see, it works on the same premise as the spot healing brush. You have to click your sample area. And I don't really think I want to do that a whole lot here. and that's looking pretty good.